Hi everyone.
Hello.
First of all, just a huge thank you to the organisers for inviting me to come and speak tonight, and I really can't wait to hear everyone else talk and just learn a bit more about your work. And I think while we're slowly sort of coming out of lockdown, it has been really incredible to meet and interact with other artists in these really unconventional ways. So I'm Molly, I'm 22 and I'm currently studying for my master's degree in fine art at University of Creative Arts in Canterbury. I'm also the founder of the slow fashion jewellery business Sophie Stokes. So in the exhibition, there are 3 vases, and these are actually a part of this wider collection of work I did called the Welcome to My World installation. So it's about over 30 pieces of ceramics, and so it's a really sort of vast collection, so it's actually just a tiny little bit from that. You can see the whole collection on my website, which you can access through the exhibition. So my practice is basically one that focuses intensely on drawing, and I describe my work as this sort of practice of using the pen as this cathartic transmission unit. And it transfers this sort of energy that's often quite negative into these very beautiful, positive and almost productive realities. So drawing is sort of my companion in life. It's with me through the best and worst of times, and it documents each moment and the mundanity of day-to-day life, and it's this real celebration of labour. I guess I started completing these ceramic pieces just before, and then during lockdown I've actually got one here. So this is one of the vases. They're quite detailed, but they're not planned. So basically I just sort of worked with an emotion. So maybe one day it could have been I could have been feeling maybe a bit down, or actually just quite excited, or I just read something interesting and then worked with it basically. So this one here, it's quite dreamlike, and it says like we're in free fall, we're not reality, we're dreams that never came true. And they're just quite these sort of like abstract but poetic ideas. And the collection itself, it's got these 3 vases, and there's loads and loads of plates and teacups and teapots. And the way I imagine it, ideally, if it wasn't in an online exhibition, it would be like walking into a forest, and there would be this wonderful abandoned table with all these ceramics on, and you sort of just walk around, and the viewer has to piece together what this artist was trying to say. And once I've created these pieces, they actually become quite abstracted from me as an artist. So the person that views it, there's all these sort of abstract ideas and things, and you almost get absorbed into your own like poetic and escapist reality. So I think it's quite an individual experience. But yeah, I like having so many of them because it's like having this big army of crazy thoughts and just, I don't know, just very wonderful ideas. So I think so these vases, they're quite ordinary and they're quite domestic, but that's what I love about them. They're so lackluster. And then you turn them into these very beautiful and exciting portals to these different escapist places, and they're all sort of filled with these sort of, I guess, like these almost like orgasmic scenes of flora and just women and drawing, and it's very sort of intense. And I think it's because it's inspired by a lot of Robert Frost poetry. So I'm really interested in this idea of nature as this space that we walk into for restoration, for knowledge. It's kind of inspired a lot by that. I think generally my work's a bit misleading because you look at it and you see this very beautiful surface, but there's potentially quite a traumatic reality underneath it. So it's a really bizarre sort of contrast. But yeah, I think also something very beautiful and something very positive despite that. And yeah, I was asked to think a bit about why I use pen rather than say, because as you can see, I do a lot of big drawings. Why do I actually choose to use sort of pens and very physical, old-fashioned techniques to make my work? And I think, you know, digital art's fantastic, but for me, I just love the experience of creating. And almost, I think I enjoy the labour of all the detail and all the building up a piece, especially with something like pen, which is quite intricate and it does take time, but I really enjoy that connection you have. So yeah, I think that's all for now, but I'll leave my social links, and I'd absolutely love to connect with everyone here. So thank you so much.
People can't hear clapping.
I forgot to unmute. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was really nice. And are you open for people to just like send you questions on DMs about your process and everything regarding that?
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions now as well, don't hesitate to ask as we go along.
Yeah. And even if you think about it later on, you can like still kind of put it in the chat, just remember to be like, there's a question for Molly. And then she can answer it later if you can't think of it straight away, but you think about it later. And I put her link in the chat room also, if someone, like you have the exhibition obviously, but if you want to see more of it, it's there as well.
I have a question for you, Molly. What made you kind of want to do sculpture and 3D stuff rather than like traditional two-dimensional? Have you got something that like draws you to it, or just like it, or?
I think I do lots of sort of big drawings and 2D work, but I was just sort of going through this phase where I was just drawing on anything. And I absolutely sort of love Grayson Perry's work and what he does with vases. So I think as well that just that inspired me to do it myself. But I'm not sort of a trained sort of in ceramics or anything. So found objects was sort of my way into doing that. But yeah, I think with ceramics, they are so plain and boring and domestic. And especially during lockdown, when we're in our homes all the time and we're thinking of all these wonderful places we could be, but we're not allowed to be, I think especially that's what resonated.
Cool, thank you.
How long do they kind of take to make? Because they look so intricate. Like,
it really depends. I've got these sort of tiny like saucers for teacups, and I could get them done maybe in a few hours, and then the vases, once I start, it's quite incessant, so maybe only a few days. But yeah, they're done quite quickly, to be honest.
Would you ever think about like creating the vase yourself? So I know, because you do like draw on them, but do you also create like the material, you could say?
Yeah, I'm definitely looking into doing that, especially because they would look so imperfect and bad, but I think that would be really fun as well, because I've never done it. It's not going to be great, but that would be part of the charm, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And then you can create like potentially some shapes within that as well that could like come out and be part of the drawing itself, so it could be quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do we have any more questions?
Hi, Molly. I mean, I looked at your work on Instagram and it's absolutely gorgeous. I really liked it. And it reminds me, do you know the dinner party, that famous feminist work where it was like displaying a triangle with a lot of ceramics. And I think some of it could belong there. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. It's very kind.
Should we move on?
Yeah, and remember, like, if anyone got any questions, like, just remember that we can make sure that we show on our Instagram, like, all the tags to everyone on Instagram, so you can like easily connect with everyone. Yeah, it just like, don't be afraid to ask questions. Like, I assume all our speakers are like welcome to any question that might be asked.
I think you can actually private chat as well. So if you do want to ask some specific questions but not say them out loud or have them in the chat, then you can direct message people on Zoom. Also, by the way, sorry, side note, I've just had a notification saying that I've got only 40 minutes on my Zoom plan. So if we do end up cutting out, just click the link again and rejoin, and then we can resume, and there'll be another 40 minutes after that. So if it cuts out suddenly, don't panic. Yes, Paloma. Is it Paloma? Paloma? Yeah. Okay. I think you're still, okay.
Yes, yeah. Hi, hello. Well, thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for selecting me. It's kind of like nice and weird, like to have the online exhibition and just going with, you know, the mouse around the walls. But it's such a lovely space, so I guess, you know, like digitally you can do whatever. So my work is about genetic inheritance and how we inherit disease and genetic mutations and how we live with that. So I explore the body and mostly how we have like physical reactions to emotions. So I see the body as a container. It's like a container that contains organs, but also as well our, as I say, like inheritance and our memories. And the work that has been displayed, it's about fertility and the impact of genetics. So questioning, like, I make these egg cartons, well, it's like a paper mache eggs that I made from empty egg cartons. And I think I found like everyday objects quite, I don't know, like quite easy to use. And I found that the empty egg cartons was kind of a metaphor for me to use and make new eggs. And I balance them. So they are not glue. And when I'm shooting and I'm balancing them, it's a way of like, I don't know, questioning, like, will I ever pass my genetics to a next generation? Or and yeah, like basically that's it. Like my work is a self-portrait, so you can see on my website. Oh, thank you. You just put this website. You can see the website. I have both a digital work and also I have analog. So last year I started working in analog photography, and I started experimenting with medium format photography. And I have 3 series, which at the moment I only put the color one, but I also work with cross-processing and with black and white. And even though I found fascinating the technologies, and you know, we wouldn't have meet if we haven't Zoom, I feel like it's so important to have like physical interaction with art. And having it on the walls or walking through a gallery space, I think is very enriching for the senses, which I think being on a screen is so difficult. But I'm hoping that, you know, things will change and then we will be able to go to private use as we used to. But for now, I don't know if anyone has any question about my work or yeah.
Yeah. Or Celia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm just on your website and seeing like, because we were lucky to see like more of your photos from this series as well, and it's just so amazing. But the person that is holding, is that a real person that is?
That's me, yeah. I'm painting, yeah. So basically, I'm painted on grey. And I have a lot of references from classical sculptures because my background is in sculpture. Sorry, that's my computer. Yeah, so I have a lot of references from classical sculptures, and I think I found fascinating how the perfect body in like Greek times, and how they were making the sculptures to the perfect body. But then, like, I was born with a genetic mutation, and I feel like there is still a lot of beauty in illness, and I don't think just the normality is gonna be okay. Let's have a perfect body, or the normal stage of the human being is just being healthy. Because if you think about it, everybody at some point is gonna get ill, and even though and even now, more with the COVID, we have seen that we are more vulnerable. So I feel like the body transforms through our own life. And I love working with dualities and transformations, seeing the inside and the outside, and visible and invisible.
Yeah, no, that's quite beautiful. And as you were saying, like a lot of time also you see in galleries that is more often portrayed the beautiful body. So and often is not like talked about, the ones that have health issues. So it's like it's really important to get that through there as well. Do you have performance pieces sometimes where you as well, or is this more in your personal like room?
To be honest, like I have been asked so many times about if I do videos, but I just don't. Like I feel like I'm doing that some kind of like a still performance, which are a still image, but it's still the process is very performative, because I set up the camera and then I move, I change with the objects around me.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I wasn't even sure if it was like a person or if it was just all like sculptures, so that's really fascinating. Is there anyone else who got any questions?
So do you say you've got a sculpture background?
Yes, yeah.
What made you kind of transition to do photography, or do you still do both alongside each other? Do you kind of
how I end up like combining? Okay, so basically, it's fine arts in Madrid, when I did it like years ago, was a 5 years course. So during the 5 years, you will learn everything, like from painting to sculpture, photography, or any other medium. And then I tried photography, and I just really like it. And I guess, I didn't want to leave one behind the other. And I found that it was quite accessible to combine both of them. I will still make my objects and then make my photographs in kind of sculptural way. Then when I moved to London, it's true that I found that economically, like it was better to I guess start photographing, because I was just living in London in a small flat. Like, where would I keep my sculptures? Where would I work? So I had to really kind of find a way to keep expressing myself until I found, and I guess now I found a language.
Yeah, you combine them really well.
I have a question, like leading off of that. So you said that you moved to, I guess, a small London flat. Did you find that you ended up like reusing your sculptures for other pieces of work, or did you keep them, or did you maybe deconstruct them as soon as you made them, like so that they were kind of just captured in time in that photograph?
Okay, so I have a sculpture or two that I have reused. First to make a piece of work, and then to actually make a sculpture with it. Sorry. Yeah. but I tend not to reuse sculptures. I tend to, I tend not to reuse it. I think for me, like the process of making, I feel a bit related to Molly when she was talking about, like making, and I need to make. I think it's something about my personality or the way I create that I have to physically make things. And so in every period when I'm making work, I think I have to make new work. But yeah, sometimes I do like have things. I try to use everyday objects, like the inside of my pillow in Float Beauty, all of the cysts that they're around, that is like the inside of my pillow. And then I am using nowadays the foam of an old sofa that we were throwing away, and then I got the foam and I'm making as well, like kind of like bodily parts.
So yeah, that's really clever.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you're free for anyone to like just DM you if they have any more questions or just contacting you.
Yeah, like, well, if anyone, I have like contact on my website. So if, it's not now, but another time you want to just throw me a line, more than welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so we have Aidan next. Hello, Aidan. You want to talk about your practice? Please go ahead.
We can't hear you. No. Maybe I think it's because you connected the headphones and normally connects to the mic there as well.
Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, perfect. All right, no worries. All right, I just wanted to start off by thanking you guys for hosting this chat and giving us this opportunity to kind of exhibit our work in some way. And I just have to say the online exhibition does look quite nice. I have no idea how you guys did it, but well done for that. And yeah, I just hope that everyone that's here has been all right and not affected too badly by the whole COVID situation. But yeah, a little bit about myself. I'm a graduate this year, graduating from Camberwell College of Arts. If you can't tell already, I am actually from Australia. So basically live in Sydney, but I do travel between London and Sydney quite a bit. So a little bit about the work. Kind of the pieces I submitted from a project called Life of a Bee. And it's basically a project exploring, in a way, it's kind of like the ontology of photography. I know that's a big word and, quite broad, but essentially what I'm looking at is what actually is a photograph. So with a lot of my research, I look at both traditional critique and contemporary critique on kind of what photography is. And I noticed kind of towards the end of the 20th century, a lot of the writing on photography was actually quite pessimistic. So you had Walter Benjamin that was talking about the dangers of mass production and the reproduction of imagery, how it'll lose its aura. And you had people like Willem Flusser, who was warning us that we were going into an age of visual pollution, where both colour in photography and photographs in general will have their voices drowned out and they'll lose their veracity. Just stuff like that. And it was warning that all these, that, photographs were like music, but the danger was that they were going to fall on deaf ears. And, that being written towards the end of the 20th century, I was, I guess, interested in what they would think of the culture that we're in now, especially with social media as a distribution channel and kind of just a rise of digital production and distribution. And so I guess the question I was asking, or that I am asking with my practice in general, is what actually constitutes a photograph? And one way to kind of explore that, is through cameraless photography. And so that's what I've been doing for the last, I guess, 2-3 years. But with this project in particular, I decided to look at, I guess, expired materials and all that kind of thing. So I thought a good place to start when trying to figure out what, I guess, photographers were scared of losing, to go back to what they were using at the time, which is the, I guess, traditional kind of darkroom processes. And so basically the work that's included in the exhibition was my introduction into this project. So I was traveling around in summer last year, actually, no, wait, 2018. I went to places like Poland, Germany, France, everything like that. And a lot of the flea markets actually had a lot of photographic memorabilia, which I thought was quite interesting. And so for dirt cheap, I was picking up kind of packets of photo paper. And so the one included in the exhibition was in Poland, and it was meant to be 100 sheets, whatever, but it was clear that it had been opened. The packaging was ruined. And I bought it for like something like, I think it was like 9p or something like that. So ridiculously cheap, because they're just obviously trying to flog things off in the flea markets. But I ended up taking that into the dark room. I tried not to expose it to any more light, but the reality was I picked it up in an outdoor flea market in the middle of summer in bright daylight. So I don't know how good that would have done, but I took it into the dark room. I developed each sheet for 60 seconds and then just put it through the rest of the process of the stop bar fixer. And I made sure I kept order of, basically kept the sequential order from top to bottom throughout the packet. And it ended up only being 66 sheets out of the 100 that was supposed to be in there. And yeah, just like initially I arranged them in sequential order so you could see how the light had infiltrated the pack of photo paper. So you can see from the work in the exhibition, there are some that are completely black, some that are like 99% white, and varying shades in between. But yeah, in the end, it just looked better as kind of a randomized grid. But essentially that was enough to kind of pique my interest. And so there's a writer, Siegfried Krakauer, who was writing on snapshot photography in 1960s. Because as soon as you buy a DSLR, you think you've got one up the people that photograph on iPhones, and you kind of, for me anyway, I kind of developed a bit of a superior, view of myself because I used a DSLR and all that kind of stuff, and talking about how snapshot photography was the scourge of photography and it's going to be our downfall and everything. So I found his writing quite interesting because he was kind of saying that, talking about how snapshot photography is kind of crucial to photography and how it shouldn't be underestimated as an art form. But in saying that, he developed a set of rules that that a photograph has to, adhere to be a photograph. And it's stuff like it has to be reproducible, has to be objective, and has to kind of show a very distinct slice of time. And so what I tried to do with the rest of the kind of mini projects within this bigger project was kind of show like will challenge what a photograph is, and you know, in doing that, essentially, if you look at what the prints are meant to be used for, they're subjectless, and they're damaged. You know, some of the works are quite sculptural when they're meant to be 2D, and like a lot of these papers are at least a century old, and I'm processing them a century after they expired. So, you know, it's faulty because it will be faults. The papers will be fogged, oxidized, everything like that. So by like judging from traditional critique, they're definitely not photographs, but the process kind of used and the materials used would suggest that they are. So it's kind of that weird, well, not weird, but it's that tension, I guess, that I play on. And some of my more recent works, which aren't included in the exhibition, they, I guess, challenge the seemingly clear-cut distinction between what's a photograph, what's a sculpture, and what's a painting. So there are quite a few different layers to the work, but essentially it's looking at what or how I guess prints can be used as a generative space, as opposed to I can never say this word, it always trips me up, but imitative. But yeah, just to kind of add to that as well, you know, there's a question of, you know, the question was posed, like, what does the analog process, I guess, mean to me? And whether or not I think kind of the whole digital kind of thing hinders or kind of accelerates work. And it's definitely something, I don't know, because it reminds me of the classic, like, you know, what's better, film or digital kind of debate. And the introduction of digital, I guess, has alleviated, well, the whole point of kind of digital was something that was more efficient, I guess, more environmentally friendly and everything than kind of film photography. And so digital kind of came in, you know, fixed up everything that was considered, I guess, controversial or wrong, or perceived as wrong with the analog process. And like that is forever going to be kind of an interesting debate, because like with I'm kind of worried because with film and all that, like a lot of the chemicals used are not environmentally friendly at all. Like it's a tough kind of practice to make sustainable. I mean, you've got really kind of good initiatives like London Alt Darkroom and stuff there. That's like veganism meets photography, and they're looking at kind of using plants and stuff as a alternate and more sustainable kind of chemical base and all that kind of stuff. But you know, it's interesting. There are a lot of environmental concerns with analog processes, but then you also think about digital processes as well. You know, like the environmental impact of just having these massive kind of warehouses and underground warehouses for data storage and, you know, everything like that. Like just in, you know, with lockdown, you know, you're having a lot of people develop from home, and not a lot of people realize that there's a strict, like there is a pretty strict procedure for disposing of chemicals to limit the environmental impact. But then, you know, in the COVID times as well, you've got, I think, Netflix is accounting for 1/3 of all energy consumption around the world at the moment, or something like that. So obviously that's got a massive environmental impact as well. So you can still hear me, all right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Perfect. Yeah, so I guess apart from the whole question of sustainability and all that kind of thing, it's something else that I've been trying to figure out is whether all photographs are made equal. And I kind of, like I posed this question on Instagram and kind of got a lot of people DMing me and getting quite defensive about it and everything. And I thought this was kind of worthy of discussion, because there's definitely kind of film, from what I see, there's definitely, I mean, I shoot both, but I tend to shoot film more now, so I'm kind of one of these people. But I feel like people that photograph on film kind of perceive themselves to be better than those that photograph on digital, especially when it comes to phone, or photographing on the iPhone, so to speak. And I guess it's really interesting. So that's why I ask whether all photographs are made equal, especially on such a sterile kind of space like Instagram. No one really knows you're photographing on film unless you specify in a caption or you include the film borders. And it's interesting because people like to, like in my experience, people have said that all photographs are made equal. And I'm like, well, why do you feel the need to include your film borders? And now you've got all these apps out there that are now imitating, I think it's called like the Unfold TX or something, film border that everyone's using for their Instagram posts and all that. And it's, I don't know, it's some weird connection to nostalgia. And again, that comes back to one of the questions that's central to my practice. I just lost my train of thought. That's really embarrassing. But it's yeah, what is it that people are scared to lose? Like, why does everyone keep looking or keep trying to go back to the past, like film, especially when digital has alleviated a lot of the, I guess, pressures that film photography posed. But I guess what I understand is like the whole film process is a lot more crafty, and that's generally the whole kind of craft aspect to it, and something that you really have to master, and it's kind of more hands-on and everything like that is, I guess, what draws people to the analog processes. But at the same time, you can be quite crafty and you can be slow and you can be thoughtful with digital kind of shooting as well. So, I mean, it's kind of, I don't know, it was a discussion I had in a portfolio review today with, I guess, one of the bigger names in photography in the UK, if not the world at the moment. And I guess he posed that same question to me as well, and it kind of caught me off guard. And it's just the thing that came out of my mouth is with kind of analog processes, there's no Command Z. You know, I guess like whatever happens, I guess is done, and there's no way you can kind of really reverse that. And so I guess it's, I don't know, the whole craft aspect is, I guess, what draws me to it. But to kind of answer the question of whether or not I think digital processes hinder or whatever, to answer that, I don't really think digital processes are something to be demonized, because after all, if we didn't have that, I would not be part of this online exhibition right now. So again, I've kind of got to be thankful of that. But you know, it's a really tough question to ask, I guess.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask the question, because there are so many points of discussion around it. Of like, yeah, I get where you're coming from. Of sometimes people use film and they do see themselves kind of in a higher position than digital workers, but both of them kind of work together in a sense, especially with a lot of photographers now who are shooting on film. They need to use the digital process as well to get their analog work out there. Yeah. So it's very interesting topic of conversation.
Yeah. And that's
I wanted to make a point that I feel that when you know analog photography, you know photography, because you have to control the light, you have to control the F number, you have to control the speed. Sometimes you don't have to control, how do you call it? Sorry, I'm just thinking in Spanish, but you know, light meter, there you go. Sometimes you don't have a light meter and you have to think about, okay, sun is 16. It's like I have 100 ISO and I have then if you have a digital camera, you don't have to think about these things. You can be the best photographer ever without having the knowledge even to control the light in that kind of analog way. So I think that is why people always felt like, oh, you know, like if you want to be a photographer, you should know analog. But for me, like as I say before, I train in fine arts, and they told us Picasso knew how to do drawings as a classical painter. If you see paintings of Picasso, his training was in like classical paintings, but then he chose to be a cubist. So you need to know your technique before you choose to be an abstract. And I think that is like kind of the game nowadays between, you know, being digital or being analog.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. Like I understand that, but then there can also be an argument that kind of thinking is outdated now. Like technology's come so far that we don't need that knowledge anymore. And it's because I feel like that could be kind of put under the banner of the, I guess, traditional or end of the 20th century writing on photography as well. You know, it just is outdated for the time. And if you look at the writing of Trevor Paglen, if you look at the writing of some of the writing of David Campany, they do kind of highlight that it is outdated thinking. But again, it does come down to the craft. Like there's almost no denying that, you know, while digital can be crafty, you know, it's inherently not made to be crafty, whereas the analog process is. So I totally understand that kind of crafty debate. And I just wanted to say, like, I did notice that there were like, I think it was like 9 chat messages or something before the call ended up last. I didn't know if there were any questions for me or anything like that, but obviously I can't see them now. So if people, you know, kind of want to send them over or do anything like that. And again, you know, like I'm quite active on social media and everything, and I really love having these discussions. So if anyone wants to, you know, message me afterwards or anytime in the future, I'd love to kind of talk about these things.
Thank you.
I actually have a question I was thinking about now, I have two. So the first one is because yeah, I don't know if you were here when we were talking in the like whole beginning, but I'm Celia, and with Maya and Tristan, that you can see on one screen, we're the one that has the Photolab, and you were talking about like the environmental issues regarding analog, and that is something as a Photolab we are facing quite a lot. But our way to kind of try and experiment to kind of make it more like environmentally friendly is alternative processing. So like instead of using developing shell chemicals, we use coffee. And
okay.
Not all the time.
So if
I want to say it.
Yeah, they can explain that then.
Yeah. Oh, do you want me to explain it?
Yeah, you can explain the alternative processing.
Yeah, at the moment we're trying to look at different kind of household items that we could use to make alternative developers, as Celia said. Yeah, so at the moment, like we've used coffee, we've used beer as well. We're going to be testing, not Guinness, no. I don't know what the brand.
It was Erdinger. It was a kind of a cheap, off-the-shelf brand from Sainsbury's. Yeah.
But it worked, and it worked really well as well. So in the future, we will be posting like a technical resources page where we have a bunch of recipes and tests. So yeah, we're always trying to find like more environmentally friendly ways of doing the analog process.
It would be interesting because I mentioned it earlier, but London Alt Photo, you should check them out on Instagram. But they're all, like I said, it's like veganism meets photography, which is actually really cool. Because I think they give residencies and I think maybe grants as well to artists that are actually experimenting with alternate processing. And so there are people there that use seaweed, there are people there that use all kinds of fruits and nuts and all this kind of things. So it might be worth you know, taking out one of their residencies or something, and they can give you some or basic recipes and stuff as well. I know they're coming out with a recipe book or recipe zine shortly, which I'll definitely be getting. But yeah, it's really good to hear that you're looking at the sustainable route, because I've been seeing lots of people develop, and you know, they've been posting their workflows on Instagram and then pouring the chemicals straight down the sink. And all I'm seeing is, you know, that's instant kill for aquatic life. So yeah, I'm really glad to hear that you guys are experimenting with sustainable processes.
And the other question I had was, how are you, because obviously you said that you were graduating, or you graduated this year, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So how has this like whole experience been for you? Because you were at university, you had facilities, but suddenly you didn't have that anymore. Like, how are you dealt with like keeping up with your work? Because it is like the work that we have, at least in the exhibition, is analog based. So you're like, that is done in the darkroom. So yeah.
This is going to be very controversial, but I've been living a dream. I'm not going to lie to you. It's, I don't know, because I guess each space, I guess, provides their own challenges. And I found, I mean, it's a bit rubbish, because as an international student, I'm paying double the fees. So I'm paying just under 20 grand a year. Oh, I mean, not great, but luckily I had a fairly successful business back home before I moved over here. But yeah, I mean, it's tough because I've found that working in a I found that, I guess, working at university, I felt the pressure to be creating constantly. So I would get into this routine of creating work, looking at it under the fluorescent light, you know, daylight temperature light for 3 seconds, making a decision on whether or not I keep it or chuck it. And that's it. But I guess working in a domestic space where I'm kind of liable for all the expenses that come with that, I had to be a lot more thoughtful with my process. And, you know, no matter where I turned in my small London flat, I had to look at my work. And so it invited for a more intimate kind of exchange. And that's when I noticed in my practice specifically is that, you know, it's a whole kind of instant gratification kind of thing. I need to feel a connection with the work instantly for it to be good enough. Whereas I had a lot more time to look at the work. I had a lot more, like, I was forced to slow down and be more considerate. And all that kind of thing. And I'm now creating, a new strand of the project where I'm kind of embracing, I think I did mention it before, I've now got work that, I guess, you know, dissolves the border between painting, photography and sculpture. And that's because I don't have access to print dryers and, you know, I've got all the textbooks in the world, but they're not strong enough to kind of flatten my prints, which is a bit frustrating. But then I found a new beauty in that as well. So, you know, I really tried not to go into this situation with a pessimistic mindset. Like, I mean, it does suck that I had to kind of set up, you know, pay to set up my own darkroom when I'm paying 20 grand a year for one. But yeah, look, you've just, I guess, kind of got to remember that this thing's out of your control and you really can't control it as much as you'd like. But yeah, I mean, graduating under these, like, it feels like I finished uni back in February, but at the same time, I definitely haven't graduated. So I think I'm just going to have to go down to Tesco, get some Tesco's finest sparkling and just hire some robes and pour myself a glass, to know. But yeah, no, it's been good. I can't lie.
No, it's good. And like can I ask, just, you haven't, because you're in London now, like you haven't gone back to Australia, right? Because I graduated last year, but I'm counted as an international student as well, and I have a place in London, but I'm from Norway, but we're not part of the European Union, so that's why. But but I've gone back in this time. Like, what have you not? Do you feel like you get to make your work better in London than potentially Australia right now, or?
I guess part of the reason why I say I've been loving this lockdown situation is because all my housemates left, so I could just do whatever I wanted. But I know in Australia that's definitely not going to be the case. So I did. It's a bit strange because there's little to no appreciation for art in Australia. So it is going to be tough there, but I made the decision last week to move back, so I'm flying out in 2 weeks' time. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be coming back to London. And so I guess kind of working in a domestic space over there is going to be quite tough. But I think not being from London and having the opportunity to study here is quite amazing, because you're going to be tapping into the art market here. You're going to be networking. Like for me, I actually studied in London. So I was quite lucky, basically all the private views are here. So I've been able to make those connections, and I can go home to Australia in Sydney. Well, I'm not really from Sydney, but close enough. I can tap into the Sydney market and make those connections there, and I can kind of bring those two together. So luckily that's quite good, and hopefully that's worth £60,000. But yeah. Sorry, I can't remember what the actual question was, but hopefully I kind of circled around a little bit.
It's been really great hearing you speak. I'm so glad you agreed to do this.
Yeah, look, I was it's my first time kind of talking to people that aren't from uni, so I was a bit hesitant, but I'm glad I did it as well, not gonna lie.
That's great.
But yeah, if there are any other questions, I'm kind of happy to answer them in my own time. I mean, I've got all the time in the world at the moment, so honestly, just shoot me a message and we can kind of have a discussion. I really don't mind.
Yeah, and we're going to link all the social media for all the speakers and everyone in the exhibition on ours, so it's easy to find everyone. Should we move on to our last speaker?
Yes.
It is our last speaker, right?
Yeah, Yassen. Yeah. It's pronounced Yassen, isn't it?
You've got that right. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Cool. Hi. Yeah, once again, thanks for kind of having us. It's really nice to not have everything completely die off under lockdown. So to kind of start, just to kind of cue into the project that I'm participating with, which is called Exemplary Home. Basically, it's a photographic exploration to my kind of attitude towards my nationality in a way, which I went into with a kind of documentary mindset, and got incredibly confused, basically started shooting intuitively and wound up at this weird piece between documentary, fine art, and something kind of personal and political. Essentially, my kind of background is I lived in Bulgaria for 18 years, got increasingly quite frustrated with the way that things are done and the way that things are in the country. So I wound up kind of giving up on chasing law as a career and moved to London to pursue photography instead. And through my last kind of 3 years on a photography degree, in spending time away from my home country, my attitude towards it has just shifted more or less completely. I kind of let go of this almost sense of shame that I had relating to it, and felt like I wanted to address the ways that I felt through my craft as my kind of major project for the year, which hopefully in time after COVID kind of lets up I get to pursue and expand on further. Now, I'm only participating with 2 images from the series. Some more images are available on my website, which is linked on the exhibition, but basically the series is all shot on 6x7 medium format in color, and it consists of environmental details, kind of wider landscape shots, some interiors as well as some portraits. And for the kind of final resolved project, it will also run alongside a little bit of text as well, which will serve to sort of fill in the blanks and provide a little bit of context to people that aren't as familiar intuitively with kind of the rather complex situations in the country. And on that note, actually, I find it kind of important to note that for the last sort of week and a bit, Bulgarians kind of all over the world and back home obviously have been out protesting I think it's the third cabinet of the same incredibly corrupt prime minister. And I'm actually currently missing the protests to do this, so I felt like I should give a little bit of a sort of shout out and use my platform to kind of bring some awareness to that, because some pretty bad and inappropriate stuff is happening back there, which has led to the landscape that I documented looking and being the way that it is, largely. In terms of my inspirations within photography, in my practice I usually gravitate towards photographing kind of the absence of things and working through implication to sort of lead people into a narrative without necessarily being too explicit about it. And I think this has to do kind of a lot with the reasons why I'm so into analog as well. I'm sort of bothered by this obsession with immediate gratification and everything being so kind of one-dimensional and immediately apparent that Instagram is kind of brought onto the medium. And I feel that now that the image economy is kind of like this pervasive major way of communicating, have sort of started straying away a little bit from what it used to be about, which kind of echoes back to the whole analog digital debate. But yeah, I mean, one of the questions that were asked was, does digital output kind of help or hinder, my personal practices in general? And it's something that I kind of had to reconcile actually for the dissertation that I wrote this year. And I've basically come to the conclusion that I don't think there's really an answer to that. I think it's almost an irrelevant question in terms of it's almost like a philosophical question that we can't really get to a concrete answer on. I think that there's pluses and minuses to it. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to kind of have this platform and meet up now if it wasn't for those digital outputs. I certainly wouldn't be able to share my work digitally if I didn't scan it in at some point. However, I do think that because Instagram is kind of this main sort of image exchange place, is now algorithmically moderated, it inherently subverts from a photographic standpoint the kind of metrics of what makes a photograph not necessarily good or bad or valuable or unvaluable, but it just completely changes what's, let's say, successful as an image. And it takes it away from the photographic as we, know it and study it and teach it traditionally. That all being said, I'm not against the platform. I'm very much on it, and it's been very useful to me, but I think that it's definitely something that deserves to be kind of debated and considered in a more kind of academic aspect, because I feel that I don't know, I almost feel like we live at a time now where there's almost two photographies. There's the kind of conventional kind of modernist understanding of it and the derivatives of that, and then there's there's something like 1.3 trillion images taken annually shared online that are completely, or largely at least, not related to that kind of mode of understanding. Yeah, I'm just looking through kind of talking points, but I think I've more or less shared what I wanted to share. The project is still developing, so kind of watch the space on my website. Hopefully at some point or another it will turn into a physical exhibition as well. But Lord knows nowadays. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. I actually had a question for you. Like upon looking at your work. So you graduated this year as well, didn't you?
I'm kind of in a quasi-graduated state. So I'm graduating this year, but I'm not really graduated. I can really echo what Aidan said about we kind of finished in February, but like I don't have a diploma. The project isn't submitted yet. It's all happening.
Okay. Well, I kind of wanted to know, like, if you had any struggle with making your work and in a different. Oh, bye, Paloma.
Oh,
Thank
bye.
you. Yeah, I wanted to know if you had like any struggle making your work whilst living in London and then having to go back and then return. Like, did you feel kind of disconnected from your work at all, or sometimes like did you feel that maybe tutors didn't understand inherently what you were making the work about because it wasn't here?
Well, I mean, I kind of have to dissect that into like 3 separate questions almost. I don't think that there was a disconnect necessarily because of the going back and forth. Because in a way, that's what kind of motivated me to even do the work. I don't think that had I decided to pursue this back there, even if I had gotten this far, I don't think that I would have made this project because it took me actually going and living abroad and almost like denouncing my kind of culture and nationality in a way, and stepping very, very radically away from that to actually kind of clock the, okay, this is something that I can instead embrace and kind of work through photographically, which I think makes for sort of quite a worthwhile endeavor. So in that regard, going back and forth didn't necessarily hinder me in any way, except for the obvious, practical issue of them having to fly back and forth between London and Sofia, and then having to travel by car to all of these really, really remote, tiny villages, which have really terrible roads between them. I was quite disrupted by the pandemic because it came about before the series was sort of as resolved as I would have liked it to be, purely in the amount of images that I had to sequence from. So actually when lockdowns kind of started getting announced and I realized that not only would it not be very sensible for me to travel back, but also it might be quite legitimately impossible to do so. There was a period of, I would say, probably about a month where I just did not work on the project whatsoever, for no other reason than I just didn't see the kind of benefits that could bring on. But it is something that I think our tutors were quite sort of understanding of, and they were very useful in helping us navigate that honestly quite sort of crappy situation. I mean, particularly with myself doing a documentary work, 3,000 miles away, probably the worst thing that could happen in terms of me concluding my project would be losing access to that environment. So without that support and kind of framework being put in place, I don't think I would have managed to resolve it in a way where I'm kind of satisfied with it. But that all being said, I also never really set out to go and shoot this project and have it be over and done with in kind of the span of a year. In a way, it sort of took me 3 years to get to a point where I'm even shooting it. And I think that it will be a pretty long while until I actually get to a stage where I go, okay, I have a body of work, I'm happy with it. It's like getting bound into a book, and like that's what it is. But I'm quite sort of happy with that as well, because it kind of mirrors my own sort of personal journey and experience in reconciling all of this.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions for Yassen?
Yeah, I mean, I've just been looking at your Instagram, and I love the minimalist quality of your work. And I think, do you suffer that, you know, Instagram is not really the platform for it? I mean, I can see large prints. You know, large prints would be so impressive of your work. Yeah.
I do, to be honest with you. It used to frustrate me so much. Kind of over the last few years, not so much anymore, because in spending kind of 6 to 8 months writing about Instagram and reading aggressively about Instagram academically, I got so fed up with it, but I also gained so much insight on how the platform actually works that it just kind of made me realize, okay, I mean, it really isn't the platform for it. It's not like, I don't edit my work for Instagram. I don't shoot things that the Instagram algorithm tends to favor. And I'm totally okay with that. I don't think that likes or engagement are good metrics for quality photography, just because they just aren't. There's plenty of work which is, without being rude, quite I don't want to say bad, but not that great. That does incredibly well on the platform, and there's plenty of, I think, really sort of challenging, impressive, and innovative work that just does not get picked up by the algorithm at all, because it takes more than 2 seconds to react to, which I think is totally sensible for a photograph. So for me, Instagram's just sort of turned into this place where I can be quite directly in touch with people that are interested in my work and my practice, and as a little bit of a platform to also just market myself and get potential opportunities off of. But beyond that, I don't feel particularly hurt that Instagram doesn't like my work too much, essentially.
So my question was more, did you manage to, you know, you got in prospect of printing big your work, you know, because what I was saying, Instagram is not really the real platform for you.
So just in terms of physical scale, yeah, I think it does hinder the experience a little bit. I mean, unfortunately, I live in quite a tiny space, and as a result, I quite rarely see my work printed. And I mean, to this day, I always have the experience when I go and print something, regardless of whether it's in a dark room using analog process or printing it digitally, actually seeing it on paper at like any sort of like adequate large scale, which isn't to say that small prints are bad, but you know, some work just works better, I think, when it's printed quite large. To this day, it completely changes the way that I feel about certain images. And I don't think that that's something that displays can ever replicate, not just because of the scale, but also because of just the materiality of prints as well, as pretentious and annoying as that sounds. But different papers just feel different ways, and that's not something that I think we can take away from photography.
We only got 4 minutes left. Should we maybe restart so we don't have to like immediately cut it off, and then we can?
Yeah, unless we could squeeze any final questions in. Like, does anyone have any other questions?
You guys hear me again?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. It's not really a question, but I'd really want to see kind of how documentary photography progresses in the wake of COVID. especially, you know, with your projects, you're talking about, you know, a 3,000 mile distance, you know, how you achieve that. And yeah, I don't know, it would just be super interesting. Because again, in kind of like the wake of, I don't know, I just think digital photography right now is in a weird predicament as well, because you're seeing the loss of photojournalism in a way now as well, with the ubiquity of you know, cameras on phones, and you know, half them now are better than most like consumer level cameras as well. So yeah, I think documentary photography at the moment is, even without COVID, but with COVID kind of compounded on top, it's facing a lot of challenges. So I'll be keeping a keen eye to see where that goes. But again, it's just kind of bringing it back to what I was, I guess, talking about before. It's because you bring up the materiality, you know, in regards to the last question as well. And you know, what point does it really become a photograph? Is it, you know, when it's kind of actually, I guess, well, is it, I guess what I'm asking is, do you think it's a photograph at the point of printing, or when it's actually kind of translated into code to be redistributed?
That's a really tough one, especially when you take into account that responding to that question honestly will make me seem like a massive hypocrite to myself, but I'm kind of okay with it.
No, go for it.
It's really difficult for me personally to escape from the digital, because at the end of the day, as analog as my practice is, it goes through a scanner. So I don't know, I like to think that it becomes a photograph once it's conceived and shot, but I also feel like it's quite sort of dependent on the image itself. Because if we're talking, and that's an analog process, it's when photons react with you know, a photosensitive surface to me. Digital cameras, in my opinion, translating visual information into code is not necessarily the same process, which is also echoed in the workflow, because I scarcely believe anyone really takes sort of just raw digital images and just post them with no sort of retouching, color correction, whatever, because well, I mean, digital cameras don't really make images for the purposes of making images look kind of pretty. They just try to be objective and, I guess, realistic, which isn't really that perfectly attainable with film, I suppose. So for me, it would be when I shoot, but yeah, I don't know, where was I? Yeah, no, so I think it's one of the great debates within photography, realistically. And with the advent of digital, and now with the internet kind of disrupting the entire medium as much as it has, it's just made it even more difficult to sort of answer that, which I'm personally fine with. I'm okay with the kind of philosophical pursuit of an answer that we know that we will likely never get. Certainly, I think when analog was the only sort of process that was around, which was before my time, but I would imagine that at that point it was kind of quite a bit easier to say, well, okay, it's a photograph when it's a tangible object. But the reality is that if we take that on now, that would mean that the trillions of images that are being taken, the very, very, very large majority of them would not technically be considered photographs. Which I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I'm very much about analog, but it also feels very sort of rude and pretentious to just dismiss everything that's purely digital just because it doesn't kind of ever embody a physical form necessarily. So it's definitely a tough one, I think.
Well, it's interesting because I guess that point that you made there, you know, you just said that before digital, kind of, you alluded to all photographs being made equal. But I guess my dissertation was actually on you know, in a broader sense, kind of snapshot photography. And it was interesting because before digital, you know, I mean, as soon as digital came about, it was film versus digital. But before digital, the debate was actually photograph versus snapshot. And so it was the exact same debate, but it was just the approach to it. And now it's, instead of the approach, it's the means. So I actually think it's really interesting because you're always going to have people drawing comparisons no matter what. And, you know, in the last one, I just put like a little reading list in the last chat. But kind of one of the most poignant ones, which is actually a joy to read, and it's a really short book. It was produced at the end of 2019, but it's a book called The Social Photo. Oh, there it is, perfect. The Social Photo by Nathan Jurgensen, and he talks about, you know, at first you kind of had painting as a means to representation, with galleries as a mean for distribution. And then, you know, photography liberated painting from representation. So then you had a rise in abstract kind of paintings. And then you also had like mass print liberate the gallery. And now you've got social media liberating the print. And you've got digital photography liberating, I guess, photography. So he kind of calls for there to be a distinction to be made between photography and the photo document, which I can't remember if he actually answers his own question. But I think that's kind of the conclusion that he ends on. But he does make a point that social media, when it comes to, I guess, visual media, for the first time ever has introduced redundancy. So he uses this analogy of like a river, and, you know, like every photograph that's uploaded will get a few seconds of fame before it goes down a stream of redundancy to hardly ever be seen again. And especially when there are so many images that are created now, there's a need for that redundancy. And so I would definitely kind of recommend checking that out. And there was something else I was going to say, but I totally forgot. Always do that. That's the problem with having ADHD. Yeah, no, I think that's me done.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about it, because I literally did my dissertation on this last year, and you're kind of saying the same as what I did, but I did the other side of it. So like, where does photography sit within the art world, and where is it art, kind of that kind of thing. It's just really interesting hearing other people kind of expand on it in a different way.
Yeah, I'd be quite happy to send my dissertation out once I fix a conclusion, because that was horrific. But yeah, I'm quite happy to make that public if people would be interested in that once I fix it up.
Yeah, for sure. I'll definitely read that. I love reading stuff like that because there's no end to it, really.
I mean, it feels, in the grand scope of things, it feels like a pointless kind of topic, but I mean, it's fun, so.
It's interesting though, I think anyway.
Yeah, no,
if anyone has any writing that they want to share, like email one of us, and then we can put some sort of page together of reading materials if people want, like a web page.
Yeah, I'll contribute to that, I think.
We do already have some people that have been like writing some like reading list that we have on our website, but we will like, it'd be great to like expand that. So yeah, what Maya said. But I have a question regarding, because you make work about your home country, and that is something I've done myself, like exploring the culture, because coming to a different country and working there, it makes you see your culture a lot of time in a different way, especially hearing how other people like perceive your culture. But did you ever try to like, because I personally try to like also make work about Norway or Scandinavia in England. Did you ever try that within your practice?
Not necessarily. I think the closest thing that I ever did to that would be when I first conceptualized the project. I realized that it would be very difficult to sort of figure out what visual system or visual language I want to sort of use to, structure it around. I don't know how it would flow rhythmically up until I went over and started shooting, which was quite, risky. I mean, I couldn't really just go in necessarily and just hope, okay, I'm just going to go to this random environment that I haven't been in for like 10 years. And, some specific locations where I've never actually been, and just sort of hope that I'll shoot intuitively and get like a cohesive, relatively coherent body of work out of it. So to mitigate that, what I wound up doing is I got some recommendations from British friends of mine that are obviously more familiar with the local landscape here on towns that have gone through somewhat similar sort of socio-political situations that the environment that I would be photographing did. And it basically just served as an exercise for me to get out of London and get myself in an environment where I've never been, that has the kind of imprints almost of, for instance, the loss of heavy industry to globalization, which is something that isn't entirely dissimilar on a kind of very, very base conceptual level to what's happened in the Bulgarian Northwest. So I traveled around a little bit and shot kind of intuitively in those spaces, which did then inform, I'm going to shoot this on 6:7, I'm going to shoot it in color. I want to shoot quite sort of wide and also have some portraits in there to further inform the narrative. So it almost gave me a shot list, like albeit a very, very loose one, to what I can sort of expect as a workflow once I was actually immersed in that environment. So it alleviated a lot of that sort of anxiety and stress.
Oh, I was unmuted. Yeah, thank you. But because as you were saying, like you will continue with this project, you're living in England right now, right?
Yeah.
Would you consider, would you think about moving back, or has that been a thought of you? Because as you were saying now, like you feel like you have to be in Bulgaria to create the photos.
Well, it's not really a question that I necessarily have an answer to. Luckily, being in this weird sort of quasi-graduated state, I think we have the benefit of a little bit of leeway and almost less pressure to kind of snap out of student mode and into working photographer mode, which, I mean, I luckily managed to blur the lines between way before COVID, and was lucky enough to, at least for a period of time, be able to practice as a photographer professionally as well as for my own sort of personal practice. And this kind of flexibility has almost allowed me to be a little bit lazy and not necessarily think about what the best approach to that work would be. Just sort of intuitively off the top of my head, I feel like the approach of staying here, because this is where most of my opportunities lie, and it's where I have a better established workflow, and traveling back and forth, it would have a lot of benefits as well in that it almost serves as a little bit of a palate cleanser. It's really, really, really jarring the first sort of 2 or 3 days after traveling from London to Sofia to then one of these tiny villages. It's so bizarre to go from central London, like living above a 5-lane road, which is just constantly busy and noisy at any given point in time, and then just being in this random village that 200 people live in that doesn't have asphalt on the roads, and like everyone's like 65, 70 years old, and it's just quiet. That really, really, really sort of loud change of pace and environment, I think has been quite sort of helpful to my process, because I find myself, probably my least favorite thing about myself as a photographer is that when I'm immersed in an environment for a little bit too long, I sort of get bored of it. So I'm always like trying to juggle multiple projects for that exact reason, just to kind of keep sort of my eyes quite fresh, because otherwise I find I can still take photos, but I definitely can't edit. It makes it really difficult for me to sort of make an effective sequence out of them. And then I'll run it by someone that's never seen it, and they'll ask me like a really obvious question, and I'll go, yeah, I mean, no, I didn't see that, because I don't know, I just didn't, even though it was an obvious sort of oversight.
Yeah, no, but it's important to have a community around you where you can talk about your photography. Oh, but yeah, it's important to be able to talk to someone about your work and just reflect on it in that kind of way. Everyone is just like captured by the talking. Does anyone else have any questions? Does anyone have any question for us? Like either Traia Photolab or Pinsharp Mag, like anything you thought about? Obviously, we're like always open on like DMs and everything. But if you have any questions, like I don't know what you like, but yeah.
Well, I'm assuming you guys are all still kind of practicing artists, so you guys should do some shameless self-promotion as well. Don't just give it all to us.
We always do. Secretly, some of our promo images are our own, so.
Ooh.
But yeah, we don't shout ourselves out as much. We like to experiment, and especially with us, the Photolab, we are always shooting like different film stocks and experimenting with like loads of different things, and we have our own darkroom as well that we can hire out to people as well, so we're always like testing. Yeah, so a lot
yeah, I guess what we were saying when we started the Photolab was because we didn't know if it was actually gonna like go well, but we were saying, okay, but if it didn't go well, we're just like, we're gonna use it anyway, so at least we will have a place to like continue our practice, and so we won't be kind of a waste of money because we're completely independent, so we haven't like applied for a loan or funding or anything like that. So it is kind of, but it is nice that we can completely like just do our own practice within the space, but it is hard to balance it all as well, because we're like working separate jobs to be able to pay for rent, but then also having the Photolab, and then also trying to make time for our own practice as well. But that's like, in this kind of case, I guess Corona actually quite helped our business. So because most Photolabs were closed while we were still open, since we do it by post. So it was quite great. And I personally been like working more on my own practice because of this time as well. So it's been nice to get the opportunity to do that, because it's so easy after university to just like kind of forget, because you have tutorials where you have to bring work to.
Well, it's good to hear that you've prospered a bit in light of the current situation. But yeah, this is a safe space, so just drop your Instagram handles in the chat. We'll give you all a follow.
Okay, let's go, people. I'm just like, I'm not going to be done.
I haven't actually shot in about a year, so there's no point in looking at mine. There's no point. I'm just gonna say it.
Do it anyway. So good.
Yeah, I think that's it. So yeah, thank you so much for coming and joining and having these really interesting discussions. Thank you.
And it's interesting to do it in the future as well. So we're definitely trying to take care of a collective through, like, even if people are using our service or not, like, it's more important for us to have a collective where people can talk to people who are using analog or just like creating art or like anything photography or art related, basically. So yeah, give us a follow on Instagram on Traia Photolab.
Yeah, well, I just want to say thank you again for the opportunity, and it really does look great, and this was an excellent program. So again, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this.
Of course. Thank you for everyone for submitting your work in the first place.
Yeah, thank you everyone for sharing your work and your words. Hopefully in the future we will be doing a proper in-person exhibition, but that won't be for a while, obviously. But yeah, this has been good as well, though. I
guess we say bye now.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.